Hello, this is Dr. Lee, and we are now going to cover the second lecture on HIPAA. And this lecture is on the HIPAA privacy rule. So what is the HIPAA privacy rule and why is it so important? And what is the minimum necessary standard? What is the HIPAA privacy rule? The HIPAA privacy rule was set to protect patients' confidential healthcare information while allowing their medical team to communicate amongst themselves and work with such information when necessary. The rule regulates who on a medical care team can work with and access a patient's PHI, as well as when the information can be accessed. The privacy rule may seem complicated at first, but it is actually quite simple. It is also somewhat flexible. It leaves quite a bit up to the judgment and rational justification. While it is true that medical interpreters that work through agencies are not actually part of a healthcare organization, they are considered to be covered entities since they have access to a patient's PHI in the medical setting. Therefore, HIPAA and the privacy rule apply to all medical interpreters and translators. The minimum necessary standard forms the foundation of the privacy rule. As a medical interpreter, if you understand the minimum necessary standard, then you shouldn't have any problem with the privacy rule. In the last lecture, we went over PHI and we saw what it covers. We also saw that it shouldn't be communicated outside of the care team. However, it is important to understand that the minimum necessary rule not only establishes what information can be discussed, but also when it can be discussed. The U.S. Department of Health and Humane Services defines the minimum necessary standard with the following words. Protected health information should not be used or disclosed when it is not necessary to satisfy a particular purpose or carry out a function. The definition that we just read can be simplified and summed up with a military expression, a need-to-know basis. If you tell people something on a need-to-know basis, you only tell them the facts they need to know at the time they need to know, and nothing more. So any information that you transmit to a third party should always be professional and should never borderline gossip. If information is not necessary, then it simply shouldn't be shared. Of course, a medical interpreter will need to interpret everything that is said during an encounter. The problem arises afterwards if the information is discussed with a third party outside of the encounter. There are several situations that could cause you a breach of minimum necessary standard. For example, if an interpreter passes off the patient to another interpreter, they would probably need to brief the new interpreter. In this case, the interpreter would not go into details on the patient's life or treatments that were not necessary for the job at hand. They would need to stick to only the basic need-to-know information. Another difficulty could arise when interpreting for the same patient for different visits. It would not be right to disclose information to the doctor that is not necessary for the encounter. For example, sometimes interpreters act as cultural brokers, but it would not be right to include personal information about the client if not solicited and not necessary. In conclusion, the HIPAA privacy rule may seem complicated, but it all comes down to the expression on a need-to-know basis. Remember, outside of actual interpreting, if the person that you are talking to does not need to know PHI, don't offer it. We hope you enjoy this lesson and that you look forward to the next lecture on HIPAA security rules.